This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
I want to welcome you tonight to the Center for Comparative Studies of Race and Ethnicity's course titled Presidential Politics, Race, Class, Faith, and Gender in the 2008 Election. And I need to acknowledge some co-sponsors. One of them would be the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, who has generously underwritten this course, as well as the Institutes for Research in Social Sciences and the Center for Poverty and Inequality. My name is Matt Snipp. I am the Director of the Center for Comparative Studies of Race and Ethnicity, and I am also a Professor of Sociology here at Stanford. Before we get started with our course tonight, I also want to make some introductions. First of all, and if you folks would stand when I introduce you, first of all, I want to introduce Dorothy Steele, the Executive Director of CSRE. Dorothy, are you in the house? Yes, over there, okay. Tania Mitchell, our Director of Service Learning and all-around jack of all trades. Dina Montague, who is a UCLA graduate student and who was responsible for assembling the video we're going to look at in a few minutes later on tonight. Dina. Frank Sampson, Matthew Adobe, and Doris Madrigal, who are the teaching assistants for this course. Cheryl Richardson, who is the Associate Director of African American Studies. Michelle Elam, who is the Martin Luther King Centennial Professor and Director of African and African American Studies. Teresa Laframboise, who is the Chair of Native American Studies. And last but not least, Jeannie Tsai, who is the Chair of our undergraduate program. Thank you. I want to begin tonight with a few words about the Center for Comparative Studies of Race and Ethnicity, and especially for those of you from the community who may be less familiar with us. Excuse the acronym, but CCSRE is an academic unit within Stanford University. We are dedicated to promoting the best in scholarly work that is devoted to the subjects of race and ethnicity in our teaching, research, and in our service. We are a nonpartisan group. We are committed to fostering discourse and dialogue about race and ethnicity independent of ideology and demagoguery. And most of all, we are a community committed to ideas and ways to bring those ideas to beyond the academy in our research and in our writing and our teaching. Hence, the event tonight continues a tradition of several other past events that we have also sponsored. One, a course devoted to the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and a later one devoted to the subject of immigration. And in this tradition, we launched tonight's course devoted to the 2008 presidential election. I don't think it's too dramatic to say that we stand on the precipice of history, and the stakes are too high to leap without knowledge. Presidential campaigns are equal parts platitudes and trivia. Apropos to this course, both candidates have pledged to, among other things, to bring prosperity and to end or reduce poverty, support equality of opportunities for all Americans, and oppose racial, ethnic, and gender discrimination. In the trivia department, we learned that Sarah Palin could gut a moose. John McCain owns 18 cars and 13 houses, or maybe 13 cars and 18 houses. I get confused. Barack Obama only owns 1 car and 1 house. Makes it simpler for the rest of us. And that Joe Biden comes from a state that has less land and more people than Alaska, but it's farther away from Russia. These things have all the intellectual substance of tea leaves, and they have about the same value as precursors for the future. And so the intent of this course is to get beyond the platitudes and the nonsense in the everyday conversation about the election, and to transcend the rhetoric and the ideology of the campaigns, and to talk in depth about details about issues that figure prominently in the lives of everyday Americans, and to cover issues that neither candidate has been fully forthcoming and forthright about, but issues that impact and deeply affect every man, woman, and child in this country. In particular, I would assert that neither candidate has directly addressed the intersection of race, class, and gender, or the people who live at the nexus of this intersection. And just to give you an illustration of that and begin with poverty as a measure of well-being in this country and the magnitude of these issues, that since 1966, poverty in this country has fluctuated between 10 and 14%, never much higher, never much lower. And so if that's politically acceptable and nobody gets too upset about that number, then consider 24% and whether or not that's politically acceptable and whether or not that's something that we want to embrace about our country. But 24% is the poverty rate for African Americans in this country. 21% is the Hispanic poverty rate. 20% is the poverty rate for single white women with children. For children living under 18 living in any household, regardless of whether it's a married couple or a single parent, children under 18, 27% are living in poverty these days. It's among the highest in the industrialized world. For African American women raising their family alone, 39% of them are living in poverty. If we look at mortality, which happens to be another index of material well-being, the United States is on par with countries like Cuba, Estonia, and Poland. 5.7 deaths per 1,000 births for white women, but for black women, 13.7, more than double the rate for white women is the infant mortality rate. In some states, black infant mortality is 3 times greater than that of whites. But if poverty and inequality are durable social divisions that defy the best efforts of politicians, then we can turn to 3 signal events from the Bush administration: Iraq, Katrina, and Wall Street. The war in Iraq was framed as a response to terrorist actions. And in the years since the war began, over 4,100 Americans have died, nearly 30,200 Americans have been wounded, and about a quarter of those are ethnic minorities. Out of that group, what we don't know is we don't know the socioeconomic background of those other folks. But it's no secret, and the Army has never made it a secret, that they tend not to recruit from affluent white middle-class communities. They seek out poor communities where the Army, the service in the military, is the only avenue of opportunity for moving up the economic ladder. Katrina was a devastating event, and it was most devastating to those who were most vulnerable and disadvantaged. We have 374,000 refugees in 34 states, but we have no idea how many remain. So who is speaking for these without homes, who are still being moved from place to place? Neither one of the candidates that I can discern. And then finally, turning to the subprime loan crisis, which is still unfolding before our eyes. Subprime loans, also known in the industry as foreclosure loans, were loans that were knowingly made to recipients who almost certainly would lose their homes in foreclosure. And in one recent study in Baltimore and Philadelphia, 50% of the recipients of subprime loans or foreclosure loans, 50% were Hispanics and 61% were blacks. 2 years ago, there was no crisis when these individuals began losing their homes. It took 2 years and a crisis to develop when the banking industry can no longer flip these foreclosed properties for a profit. And so these are just a few of the issues that we're going to be touching upon in the coming weeks in this course. Issues that I hope are near and dear to your hearts because they are crucial to our future. And again, I want to welcome you to this course and introduce my colleague, Michelle Elam, who has a few remarks of her own.
Thank you, Matt. Professor Snip and I are listed as the faculty representatives for this class, but it's really a collective effort. And I just wanted to say a few words. It grew out of a lot of conversations with colleagues last spring as the campaigns and the passion surrounding it really heated up. And a lot of the discussion in the news, blogs, editorials in the street was increasingly inflammatory, accusatory, self-righteous, or defensive. Everyone, of course, noticed that the issues of race, faith, gender, class were at play, but what to do with them was an entirely other matter. Some argued that the campaign would be better off without discussion of these issues. We should intellectually quarantine them, things like race, class, gender, faith, and so the argument went. These are all part of antiquated civil rights era tribalist identity politics that can only fan the flames of civic discord. We're supposed to be in the post-race era, after all. But those at the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity felt called to this conversation because these are the issues that are precisely the subject of our research and teaching. Over 100 Stanford faculty from all disciplines in the humanities and the sciences are affiliated with this center. For these colleagues, an academic institution is the perfect place to analyze rather than jettison race, class, faith, gender, identity. After all, none of these were newly injected into this campaign by the fact that a black man and white women were running for the highest political offices in the land, because race, gender, class, and faith have always historically informed campaigns between white men as well, although their presence has often gone unmarked in those cases. We would like to mark them, to see what's before us rather than willing it away by fiat or in fear. This course, as Professor Snip suggested, is meant to represent the nonpartisan, interdisciplinary, and comparative approach to race and ethnicity primarily, but not exclusively, that guides the center's intellectual mission and its scholarship. And we really felt a deep responsibility to offer a course like this in which to civilly and deeply engage these issues. As Professor Snip pointed out, I just wanted to re-emphasize as well, our course is about analysis. It is not about political advocacy. And to that end, I'd like to mention just a few of the assumptions that are going to be guiding the course. One is something that Professor Snip alluded to before, and that is we understand the importance of race, faith, gender, class, identity as analytic social categories. They're sites of critical investigation. So they can often be experienced privately and emotionally, but they are also afford wonderful opportunities for social investigation and analysis. Secondly, we're really alert to what Kimberly Crenshaw called intersectionality. We won't use a lot of jargon here, but it's useful for what we're trying to do, because in the title, of the course, you have race, class, faith, so on, and it's just listed serially by commas. But in reality, these interact with each other and tend to mutually inform each other in complex and dynamic ways that often work against social justice if they're not fully accounted for. To use a really commonly cited example, data suggests that a black woman told by federal agencies to report domestic violence may be reluctant to because of her experience with or perceptions of racialized police force. So the intersectionality there of race and gender in such a case, especially if it's statistically generalizable, might help us craft more effective public policies and practices. So intersectionality further recognizes that race, gender, etc. are not historical or experiential monoliths. They don't hold the same in all situations, and they don't hold still historically. Racialized experience may be more salient in one experience or situation than another, and something like race always works in concert with other factors that might reshape, reinforce, or mitigate against discrimination or privilege, as your example implied too. To use other oft-cited examples, just to make this concrete, if you're a white gay man, you'll most likely multiply exercise both privilege and experience discrimination as you move through social and political spaces. So we're less interested in getting caught in the critical cul-de-sac of naming what race is or isn't, or nailing down, who is more religious than thou, but rather how race works, how faith works, how gender and class work in this campaign specifically. Not what they are, but what they do. Not is Obama black enough, or McCain Christian enough, or Biden or Palin working class enough, but rather how and to what ends are these issues and questions deployed. Third, we understand race and ethnicity in particular as a function of both structural formation and cultural representation. And what I mean by that is we're going to be focusing on both of those things in the class. And I'd like to really emphasize the importance of the visual logic of media representation in bringing us to political positions. It's worth considering how political symbolism and imagery aren't just spin and deception, which is how we often talk about them. They motivate and mobilize people. So cultural representation, it's useful, I think, sometimes to think about it as not just simply gloss and shine, masking socioeconomic truths, because the representations that we see in the media also shape those truths, and to that extent are often powerfully constitutive of social realities, not just reflective of them. And I hope you'll find that the panelists that we've gathered over the next few weeks look at not just politics, but the faith, race, class, and so on, from a really wide perspective, both politically and disciplinarily. The aim in gathering these scholars from across the country was to provoke, to agitate, to motivate you to think critically as we make this wild ride of the presidential campaign. So with that, I want to introduce our keynote speaker today, Professor Al Camarillo. Professor Camarillo is a Stanford professor of history. He's widely regarded as one of the founding scholars in the field of Mexican-American history and Chicano studies. He's published 7 books and over 36 articles and essays dealing with the experiences of Mexican Americans and other racial and immigrant groups in the American cities. In addition to receiving too many scholarly accolades to cite here, he is the only faculty member in the history of Stanford University to receive the 3 highest awards for excellence in teaching and service to undergraduates, including the Lloyd Dinkelspiel Award for Outstanding Service to Undergraduate Education, the Walter Gores Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Bing Teaching Fellowship Award for Excellence in Innovation in Undergraduate Teaching, and most recently, Camarillo was awarded the Miriam Rowland Prize for Volunteer Service. In addition to teaching and research, he's occupied several administrative positions that I just wanted to mention a few here because they're particularly relevant. He was the founding director for the Stanford Center for Chicano Research, the founding executive director of the Inter-University Program for Latino Research, associate dean and director of undergraduate studies in the School of Humanities and Sciences, and the founding director of this Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. And in 2002, he was named the Miriam and Peter Haas Centennial Professor in Public Service. Please welcome our keynote speaker for the evening, Al Camarillo.
Thank you, Michelle. Wonderful turnout, terrific turnout of our students and members of our local communities. We're delighted to have you here tonight. Well, I want you to think back over the last many months. We've heard the pundits, we've heard the analysts, we've heard the commentators talk about how unprecedented this campaign is. Right? At this particular moment in time, a historic moment that we see unfolding and coming to a close in the next few weeks. And indeed, if we look at the issues and we look at the candidates, to be sure, it is, we have to pose the question. Let's see if I can get this PowerPoint up. Here we go. Is it an unprecedented election? And if so, how? So I want to phrase that, I want to pose that question at least 2 or 3 times over the next 15 or 20 minutes, and I'll keep track of time. Well, of course, we know the most historic part of this is the candidacy of Barack Obama, right? And one looks at this, and I wrote a piece a few weeks ago in the Mercury News, and I phrased it as it's race and the American dream. Why do I say that? Here's a candidate who was obscure until he gave that riveting speech to the 2004 Democratic National Convention, right? And it put him on in a spotlight. And he's had a meteoric rise since, right? African American, but he's also white. Why do we refer to his race and the American dream then? Well, think about the story that's told about this historic candidate. Kenyan father, married to a Kansas woman, they meet as students. The father's really not in his life. He's raised as much by his white grandparents. He grows up in Hawaii. It's a tale of access to opportunity and education. Goes to Occidental College and then off to Columbia and Harvard Law. And instead of making a fortune, which he could have done, of course, he goes to organize in the south side of Chicago. And he goes through the political process and he's elected. But again, a figure that very few people would have known this name, right, before 2004. And now a figure of international renown. So a lot of folks will say this is historic because an African American, part white, part black, we have to remember that, is now on the verge of becoming the President of the United States, poised perhaps to be the President of the United States. So race and the American dream, but depending on your political persuasion, this could be the nightmare, right? Race and the American nightmare. Think about the way, we're going to be talking about representations in this class, the way things are, the way the media presents things to us, the way that we are consuming the representations, the images. So in this case, instead of the superhero, and I love that one, but let me go back to that one just a second. All right, so yeah, I love this one. But I want to challenge, does anyone own this sneaker in this room? If you do, we're going to give you a door prize. I've not seen this yet. I need to see this sneaker. All right, so we have race in the American dream, the positive side, but then we have the pejorative side, right? We have a man that, of course, this is the New Yorker cover, but is it in fact a reality that some people perceive him in the way I remember this fellow after the West Virginia primary? And he simply could not bring himself to vote for Barack Obama, even though he agreed with some of the issues. And in his statement to the press, he said, well, you know, Barack Obama just doesn't seem American enough, right? It's not American enough. And, of course, this depicts in an interesting characterization, right, that he's un-American. In fact, he's maybe on the other side. He has friends like his preacher mentor, who's, think about the way it's spun again, unpatriotic, un-American, anti-white. Worse than that, and this I heard this yesterday, but we're going to hear this more, in terms of personal attacks, of course, in presidential election, other elections, increase in their propensity as we get nearer to election day, right? So his good buddy from Chicago, Bill Ayers, member of the Weather Underground from the 1960s. So this is the nightmare part of the American dream. But clearly, we wouldn't have this kind of discourse unless it is a historic occasion. Race does play a critical role here, and we're going to be examining that in detail over the next few weeks. But that's not the only thing, right? We have women in the American dream, brought to the forefront in dramatic fashion by Hillary Clinton and now by Sarah Palin. I didn't say anything, I guess, Nick. All right, so almost 90 years. 90 years, think of it. Nearly 100 years since women won the right to vote. And we have the first real serious presidential candidate for a major party who came really close in so many ways to being that presidential nominee, that candidate for the Democratic Party. And then it took another 90 years, almost 100 years, before we have a vice presidential candidate who is potentially very close to being, as they often say, a heartbeat away from being the president of the most powerful country, the most amazing military machine in the world, and once the economic leader of the world. That now is in question. So there's gender and the American dream. We are at a moment, the pundits and the analysts say, where this is possible in early 21st century America. But there's also the nightmare. And I have to tell you, when I saw this on Saturday Night Live, I had to take a double take because I thought, how did they get Sarah Palin on there tonight? Tina Fey was remarkable in that characterization. But you all know about the critique, right, especially of Palin. And people argue that, yes, we're at a moment in time where, in fact, she could possibly be the vice president. And I've heard some folks say 1 in 3 chances, if in fact the ticket is elected, that she'll be the president of the United States. Well, the dream for, depending on your political persuasion, could in fact be the nightmare. But that's not all what folks are saying about the unprecedented nature of this election at this particular moment in time. The election and economic crises. Now just think about it. Up until a few weeks ago, we knew about the subprime mortgage problem, right? It's been talked about. We knew within the last 5 to 6 weeks that some major players on Wall Street were in deep, deep trouble. We knew that some major worldwide insurance companies were also on a precipice of perhaps cataclysmic decline. And then the last 2 weeks, unprecedented. How would we think a few months ago even that we could have had a a situation, an economic crisis of the proportion that we are now seeing unfold on a daily basis. So again, for McCain and Obama, for the ticket on the Republican side, the Democratic Party side, we see this as a fundamentally important issue. Unprecedented, they're arguing. Let me just skip over there briefly. Unprecedented, perhaps, as well, because of a war that's raging on for 6 years. A nation that is deeply torn, has been for hundreds of years, with sectarian violence and politics, and we're so deeply embedded in that war that the prospect of removal from that conflict is extremely difficult. The threat of an expanding war on terror, Afghanistan, but now reaching into Pakistan, with the potential of nuclear armament in the country of Iran. So again, the analysts, the pundits will say, look, there's something on the international scene that's unprecedented in this election, and that these candidates, and whoever becomes president, is going to have to deal with. Let me go back one here. There are other wars. There are wars overseas, and there are different kinds of wars on the domestic scene. In the last 30 years, we've called them the culture wars. And of course, they're not new. The culture wars, for the most part, historians say, well, they emanate from the 1960s and certainly from the 1970s as they galvanize, in fact, polarize Americans on the left and right. And we see this playing out in this election again. And some are arguing maybe in more profound ways. So, for example, people on the right say that the election of Obama might give a second life to affirmative action. Right? Affirmative action is a policy of opportunity. People on the left are arguing that if John McCain is elected, that we will see the Roe versus Wade come to a culmination and it'll be overturned by the Supreme Court. Right? So we can see these issues lining up: war, anti-war, pro-choice. These are all issues that are resurfacing. The culture wars are alive and well, and they are polarizing Americans as they've polarized us in the past. Perhaps more profoundly in this election. So we have to ask the question then, how unprecedented is this election as we look at these issues of race, the role of women, this gender in American society, the culture wars that surface and manifest themselves in a variety of ways, economic crises that loom on the horizon in such profound ways for us, and unpopular wars abroad. Let me just take a few minutes, and I'm going to historicize this a little bit for us, put this in perspective, because the pundits and the analysts and commentators often don't give us a historical perspective. And what would you expect from a historian then? A little bit of history. Well, it's not the first time we've had African-American candidates running for high office. Some of you that are my age or a little older will remember these folks. I'm afraid the students in the class will have no idea, for the most part, who these people are. Shirley Chisholm, here. See, is this thing working? Yes. First African-American woman elected to Congress. The first African-American nominated in a major party for the presidency. Right? She had 152 first ballot votes in an election in 1972. Other people, of course, we know Jesse Jackson is a civil rights pioneer, and he too ran for presidency in 1984 and later. More recently, someone like Al Sharpton, again, another African American who tested the waters, Now, you wouldn't realize, most of you don't know that the comedian Dick Gregory actually put his name as a write-in candidate for the Peace and Freedom Party in 1968, I think it was. I loved his poster. Isn't that a wonderful poster? He envisioned himself to be president, and therefore we're going to have a dollar in his image. So there's a legacy. There's a legacy that brings us forward to someone like Barack Obama today. Of course, these people pale in comparison to the seriousness of his candidacy, right? That he, in fact, is possibly going to be the next president of the United States. But what about women candidates? How unique is Sarah Palin? How unique was Hillary Clinton? Well, there are historical legacies there as well. Senator Margaret Chase Smith, Republican senator, long-term senator, in 1964 was nominated, received, I think, 27 first vote ballots at the Republican National Convention. So there's Hillary Clinton. There was a predecessor to Hillary Clinton in another age, in a different party. And there's a Geraldine Ferraro, who many of us in this room remember, in 1984, the running mate with Walter Mondale, in a disastrous election, of course, a landslide election for Ronald Reagan, but she set a precedent, a woman as the vice presidential candidate. So there are many precedents, but this is different, right? We would ask that question again. Culture wars. Well, yes, the culture wars of the last generation have been defined in particular ways, but we could look back and say around presidential elections there were other kinds of culture wars. Those of you who know their American history, and I won't quiz you on this after class, this fellow is Al Smith, 1928. He ran against our own Herbert Hoover. What really torpedoed any possible chance that he could have a go of it as a presidential candidate? One defining cultural war characteristic: he was Catholic, and there's no way Americans were going to vote for a Catholic in the 1920s. This is a Thomas Nast photo, but this was the tenor of the times, culture wars. So this is a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right, defending the shores against these hordes of Pope-clad Europeans descending on the shores of America and corrupting the culture and attacking the children. This was alive and well. Again, those of you old enough to remember, this was still, and this is something the students will have to understand, this was still a pervasive issue when John F. Kennedy ran for president, that he was Catholic. In fact, the story goes, would he listen more to the Pope than to members of Congress or to the American public? Believe me, students in the class, I mean, again, those folks who are my age or older, we remember this as something that was real. It was a culture, but it was different. That was a religion. That was Catholicism. We're talking about something perhaps fundamentally different today, right? There's a litany of presidents who have faced economic crises. Of course, whoever's elected may face a situation as grave as FDR back 1932 with the Great Depression. But others have faced problems, right? From Jimmy Carter, a period of inflation, of stagflation, of deep recession that Ronald Reagan inherits into the 1980s and perhaps exacerbates. Bill Clinton is, one could argue, becomes president because economic issues define the way Americans are going to vote. They voted then, and maybe the way they're going to vote now. And this famous line, "It's the economy, stupid," torpedoed the first Bush for a second administration. And John F. Kennedy also faced an economic recession, not a steep one, but these are presidents that inherited problems in the economy. Unpopular wars, of course, Lyndon Baines Johnson decides not to run again, right? Not to run because of this war that had dragged down his administration. And Richard Nixon, of course, inherits a Vietnam War, and George W. Bush is largely responsible for starting another war that we're in today. So let me come back to that question then. I've argued that the pundits and the analysts and the commentators have had us think about this as an unprecedented historic occasion, right? And historians and others will say, but wait, let's see the connections here, right? They're important connections. We just can't look at the contemporary and detach it from what has affected us today, right? So we're trying to make those connections, trying to establish those continuities of history. But if you bundle all these things together, race and gender and economic crises and the culture wars and foreign wars, I would submit to you that this is an election of truly historic proportion. Because when you bundle all those forces together, you have an economy that is on the cliff. We've not seen the end of the crisis by any means. We have a war that the next president will inherit. How do we extricate ourselves from that war? Right? How do you fight a war on terror? So these are issues that will define how we vote. For someone like Barack Obama will contend with what people say may be the Bradley effect. Bradley effect, Tom Bradley, mayor of Los Angeles, who Californians who may have remember that candidate. And in the polls, looked pretty good, looked like he was going to win. The Bradley effect is African-American man, so when white voters went into the voting booth to cast that secret vote, they couldn't. And so you talk about the Bradley effect with Barack Obama of maybe 3 to 5%. We don't know about what's actually going to happen. That is another factor, right, which might shift how people are going to vote. Can they vote for an African-American male? So this course is about trying to sift through some of these issues, try to define these issues, try to sort them out, to make sense of them. And we're delighted so many of you are with us tonight and hope you are with the remainder of the course. The students, you're going to have access to some outstanding people we're bringing from all over the country, as well as some other faculty from Stanford that will engage us, will provoke us, motivate us, as Michelle Elam suggested this course is about. So with that, I am going to say thank you, and we're going to turn to a video now that Dina has done for us, and in fact resonates with much of what I said in terms of the historical with the contemporary. Thank you very much, folks.
It is my pleasure, I'm Tania again, by the way, the Director of Service Learning for the Center, and it is my pleasure now to facilitate a panel of students who've had the opportunity over the last year to work on some of the campaigns that are currently that have shaped this election so far. One of the things that Professor Elam said earlier is that we wanted to create, to motivate students and to motivate people in the room to think critically about the issues shaping this election. And one of the opportunities that we've created for students to do so is actually to participate in a political service component connected with this class. And those students will be working with various issues related to the campaign that we'll be talking about later for those of you who are signed up for 3 units, to figure out exactly how these issues are playing such an integral role in the election this year. So I'm going to bring up our panelists and invite them to share with you their experiences as participants in the campaign. The first student I'd like to introduce is Stuart Baymel. Stuart is a senior in political science here at Stanford and a Stanford Daily columnist. You've probably read Stu's Views. He was an associate with the Hillary Rodham Clinton campaign, what he called a glorified intern. Next, I'd like to bring up Sarahi Constantine. You can hold your applause to the end, if you would. Sarahi is a sophomore in economics here at Stanford, and she is the current Stanford chapter coordinator for Students for Barack Obama. Plus, she has worked in 5 states on the campaign in New Hampshire, Nevada, California, Texas, Pennsylvania, and her home state of Florida. Prad Chandrasoma is a senior studying modern thought and literature, and he's on the executive committee of Stanford Conservative Society. He was a volunteer or the area captain for Stanford for McCain during the primary. And last, I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Diano. She's a senior in political science also, and it was a member of the Obama Advance team in Iowa. Thank you. So a couple of things that I want to say is, first of all, that we shared a few questions with the panelists that we're going to ask them to address as they continue. It's a little intimidating to be up here talking in front of such a large audience. So please know that they will be, they've had the opportunity to jot down some notes and maybe reading a little bit as they prepare their statements, and to give them that, that ability to do so. The panel is comprised of students representing as wide a wide array of views as we could gather here today. We did invite others to participate, and we didn't get good responses. We were working to get some representatives from alternative and third-party candidacies like Cynthia McKinney's campaign or Ralph Nader's campaign. Also looking to bring in students who've worked on campaigns of other candidates who are no longer in the race, such as John Edwards, Mitt Romney, et cetera. And we weren't able to pull those students into the panel today. So we're really excited about the balance and the representative views that we have here today, and hope that you will enjoy this conversation that they're about to engage in. So the first question that we asked them to address is, what motivated you to take an active role in this election? And Stuart, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I felt that this was a change election any way you wanted it. The Bush administration had been in power for 8 years, and I think, at this point, 75%, 85% of Americans think that we're on the wrong track. And so any way you want to put it, it's a change election. And to me, the question was, who is the change agent? Who is the person best qualified and best able to bring about change? And I wanted to be a part of that campaign. And after some careful thought, I felt it was Senator Hillary Clinton would be the best choice. And I was excited to be a part of the campaign. And I felt that even though we didn't win, I think we did change the political discourse in a way that was positive toward an overall change in the direction of the American people.
For me, I'm come from a very political family, so I've always been involved. I actually first met Senator Obama in 2004. My mother is a political journalist, and she interviewed him after his DNC speech, and so I was at the interview, and I was just really inspired by him in high school, and this is the first election that I can vote in, and I wanted to do more than just vote. I wanted to actually do something. I wanted to help. So like Sue, I took a careful look at both candidates, and for me, the choice was Barack Obama for the change that this country needed, because I was actually talking with Beth earlier, that we need, after 8 years of Bush, we needed someone in the White House who could respectfully disagree with people. And that's what I think is the most important characteristic, and why I support Barack Obama.
For me, I had been increasingly distressed with the degree to which this country has become polarized in the past 8 years, especially with regard to the incendiary policies and divisive policies of the Bush administration, and which not all conservatives like, but I'm one of the conservatives who doesn't like them. But I wanted a candidate with a strong record of bipartisanship and somebody who could start to bridge that gap. And for me, after looking carefully at actually candidates on both sides, I was considering voting for Senator Obama at first, too, and getting involved with his campaign. I decided ultimately that Senator McCain's history of really reaching across the aisle and getting things done was a campaign and a sort of an ideology that I wanted to get involved with and be a part of. So I was very excited to join his campaign.
Well, I got involved because I needed a job. So two summers ago, I knew I was going to work for a campaign in Iowa. My mom had just moved there. I thought, hey, I can do something I'm interested in and not lose a whole lot of money doing it. So I signed up with a campaign, And it ended up not being the campaign that I stuck with. And why actually has to do with a story that Michelle Obama often tells. The first time I met her, she was talking on the south side of Des Moines. It's a predominantly black neighborhood in Des Moines, and one of the very few. And she was talking to a room of about 25 people at a community center, and she told a story about how she fell in love with Barack Obama. And he had taken her, I'm sure you guys have heard this, to a church basement on the south side of Chicago to one of his community organizer meetings. And he gave a speech about the world as it is and the world as it should be. And he kind of underscored the importance of us as citizens getting up out of bed every day and doing whatever we could to make it so that that gap was smaller. And she fell in love with him 20 years ago listening to that speech, and that's what I heard in April of 2007 at the California Democratic Convention. So, he spoke to me, and as soon as he stopped speaking and I stopped crying and I regained my powers of speech, I called my mom. I said, I gotta quit my job. There's nothing I can do. I can't even sleep. I have to do everything I can to get this guy elected. And sure, I wanted to spread his message. I wanted other people to share. Yeah, fine. But I was addicted to this feeling that he gave me that I could make a difference, and I had to get my fix. I was going to do anything I could to stay under the influence, and that's why I stuck with his campaign.
Can each of you talk for a minute, just really quickly, about what you did in your different roles with the campaign? So what was your day-to-day work look like?
Should I go first? Okay, I was an associate, which is a nice term for intern, and I also had a role in the Hillary on Campus campaign. We held a few events. There were not many of us on campus. I could speak about that later. But in terms of my work for the campaign, I would go in on weekends and sometimes during the week, and I was also the coordinator for the Peninsula area volunteers. So anyone between San Francisco and San Jose. For about 2 months, I was in charge of email and weekly conference calls, coordinating them, making sure that people had what they needed to have in order to get more volunteers, and so on.
I began as an intern in New Hampshire. I was basically organizing all the canvases. I would go door to door in the cold, bitter winter, walking in the snow, and then eventually you start moving up. I started organizing the canvases and staying in the office more, pulling long nights, making sure that everything was ready. And now, as the chapter coordinator, I basically have to run everything Obama on campus to make sure we have volunteers, we have people going to Nevada, we have people going to New Mexico, we're making phone calls.
As an area captain for McCain, there wasn't a whole lot going on at Stanford for McCain, but and there wasn't a whole lot going on actually in the Bay Area for McCain either, or in the state of California. But my job was basically to I would go door to door, and I would knock on doors and talk to people. But my primary goal and our goal here in California was to call people in Ohio and make sure that they were voting for McCain in case they were undecided. And that's sort of the main purpose of California McCain volunteers. We call people in Ohio.
I worked for the Obama Advance team. What the Advance team does is plan and execute all of Senator Obama and all of the surrogates' public and private appearances at a given location. So I was on a 6-person team who planned well over 100 public events in 6 months leading up to Iowa. So we worked with our press shop to make sure the message of the day was getting out. We worked with our field team to build crowds. And try to get people out there so we could register them to vote and get them to sign a supporter card. We worked with the Secret Service to make sure the candidate was protected, and that's pretty much what I did. Glorified party planning, if you will.
Great, thank you. So issues of race, gender, class, and faith have received a lot of attention this campaign. How important were these issues in your work, in the people you encountered while working on the campaign, on the messages that the campaign shared with the public? Sarahi, would you like to start?
Sure. For me, for my personal choice, I didn't consider race, gender, any of those issues for who I was going to support, but I have encountered a lot of it on the campaign. Actually, it's mostly been about class. In Texas especially, I was in Texas for about 2.5 weeks, and we were labeled latte liberals. And so there were ads all over the newspaper, all over the radio, and we were just the latte liberals. And so that was the biggest issue, was even going door to door. Like, in Texas. I was in Tom DeLay's district, which was interesting. But I actually surprisingly didn't experience issues of race. I went out to Galveston and they had to insist on giving us police protection in order to go canvassing because they were worried about issues of race and racism and everything. But I never once got a single comment about Barack Obama's race or my race or anything regarding that. So I feel that those issues have been more played up in the media than I've actually experienced in my experience in the 5-6 states that I've been in. But it's class and trying to defy the latte liberal arugula eating candidate.
So the one thing that I want to speak to is the issue of gender, and this I actually encountered quite a bit in my work for Senator Clinton. Most of the volunteers that I had were middle-aged women, and it was inspiring to see them so excited about a candidate because they honestly believed that this was their only chance to see a female president in the White House in their lifetime, and it was inspiring to see the sort of visceral love for Senator Clinton and what she stood for. I mean, these are women who grew up in the aftermath of the feminist movements of the 1960s and the 1970s and the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment to pass Congress and to pass all the states. And so it was inspiring to me to see them believe so fervently that this was their one chance to see it happen. And the other thing that I actually encountered quite a bit was some form of misogyny, actually, in my experience, and we saw that on the video when it was the "Iron My Shirt," and this I did see at campaign events and also on campus, where I felt that Senator Clinton, as compared to perhaps the other candidates, was more judged for her appearance and for her dress than everyone else. Her choice of pantsuit color or her hair or whether or not she had plastic surgery. These were actually questions that were discussed among Stanford students. And to me, I felt that detracted from a serious engagement with the policy issues and the policy differences between Senator Clinton and perhaps the other candidates.
For me, I really can't say that that those factors really affected my decision, but since I made my decision of who to support, and since I have been sort of on the stump for Senator McCain, I have found a surprising response in when I talk to people in my ethnic community, which is that, why are you supporting the rich white kid's candidate for president? There is a perception, at least in the small community from which I come, Sri Lankan American community, not a big community, but it's a community, and we have there's a strong response to people who don't support Senator Obama's candidacy as sellouts and as people who don't care about race issues. And for me, I'm not quite sure how to address that issue. I usually don't like to dignify that sort of stuff because I don't think that is a sort of an appropriate topic to bring to the table for discussion. I don't think that you're a sellout because you support a certain candidate, so I don't generally dignify that sort of dialogue. But it's interesting that it happens. It's very interesting that it happens, and I, was surprised to see that sort of the sort of vitriol that I've seen thus far.
I'm going to talk about Iowa because that's where I'm from and that's what I know. And I guess what I kind of wanted to share in this room, and it's going to kind of carry over onto my answer to the next question, is about how much the mainstream media and others tried to paint the voting patterns in later states in terms of, you didn't even have to go to the polls. If they knew your race and your gender and how much money you made, then you don't think, you just vote like everybody else does. And one thing I think that I observed to be quite different in Iowa is if Iowa had come later, there's no way Senator Obama would have won by that metric. I mean, we are a state that's 94% white, 2% black, 3% identify as Hispanic or Latino. We're the number one state for disproportionate minority imprisonment, and we're old. Especially caucus goers. They're older than average. So how did he win? I think that it was a testament to the massive resources that the campaign put into the state. I think it's a lot easier to vote for a person and not a color or a gender or a creed if you have shaken his hand and if you have hosted him in your backyard or if you saw him do a town hall in the local live auction barn, as it were. So I guess my observation of all these different things is that it wasn't an effect, or it didn't affect the state of the race because people had a chance to see beyond that. And I wish that all the other people in every other state had gotten the chance to meet all the candidates and really make an informed decision, or maybe they were and the press didn't give them credit, and there's a whole host of other reasons for why we saw some of the patterns that we saw earlier in the primaries, and I hope that you guys all write papers on them and email them to me. I'm so excited to read them. But that's been my experience with race and gender. So.
Elizabeth, I'll just ask you to continue on as I ask the next question, which is, how do you feel about the conversations about race and religion and gender and sexuality and age even, class, not to mention, that have really saturated the election coverage? In particular, is there a place where you'd like to see more conversation or a different conversation taking place?
There are a lot of different conversations that I think should have taken place, and I was particularly inspired by some of the opening messages about what the appropriate venue for such a discussion is. And I don't think it's the campaign's role to get into a discussion of these issues. I think it's the job of the organizer to get in the face of every person they can find and find a way to deliver the message that resonates with that person. And I'm not sure that with the way we consume the media, that's the appropriate venue either. But for me, the one issue that stands out was the kind of extensive coverage of Senator Obama's problem with, quote, lunchbox Democrats or white working class voters that we talked about in April and May. And again, I'm going to go back to Iowa. He didn't appear to be having those problems in Iowa, and I wonder if it wasn't some other factor that was shaping those voting patterns. And I think it's a conversation that the Obama campaign probably didn't want to have. I'm not sure if the media was equipped to have it. And again, I really hope that that's a research question that people ask, why the voting patterns differed in Iowa versus some of the later states. So,
for me, I guess the conversation that I would like to see happen is on a less national scale. I mean, a less publicized scale, and I would really like to see a conversation taking place, at the grassroots level with all of you. And for me, the big identity issue here, as a student here, is the issue of political diversity on campus. I'm a conservative at Stanford. I am probably the only McCain supporter in this room. If there are others of you, come say hi afterwards. But I am a conservative on campus, and I was not only the only person in my circle of friends and one of the only people in a minority of conservatives, but I was among a minority of conservatives who supported McCain. I was equally reviled, if not more so, by the conservative community at Stanford for supporting McCain, as I was by the liberal community for supporting McCain. It's a really difficult situation that frankly shouldn't exist. I don't think it should exist. I don't think that it should be I don't think that anyone should feel ashamed or scared to get up in front of a group of people and speak about being conservative in college. But it's something that exists. I tabled at the activities fair a couple of weeks ago for the Stanford Conservative Society, and that was an interesting experience. People would come and they would talk, and we would ask them to sign up and to get involved, and they would say, well, I would, but I don't know how to say that I'm part of this society to my friends. I don't know how to discuss this. And then there were the other side of people who saw me tabling for the Stanford Conservative Society and would spit on me and would call me names like fascist, warmonger. And it's not fun. And it shouldn't happen here at a place that is supposed to broker intellectual exchange. The open market of ideas has been closed to some of us to a certain degree here. And I would like to see conversations happening about that. And I would like to see that start with all of you. That's my 2 cents, I guess.
I guess for me, the biggest issue is race. I mean, race is obviously this elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about in this election, at least not in like the national level. And I don't really think it should be talked about on a campaign level. I feel like it's something that needs to be talked about in communities, on dining room tables, within the family, with your neighbors. It's not a campaign thing. It's not something that Barack Obama has to come out and give a speech on race. That's not his place. This is something that should be brought down to the grassroots level, which, you know, the Barack Obama campaign itself has created this huge grassroots organization where I think that's where we should be having the discussion on race and how race is going to play a role in this election. I mean, there are 28 days, I think, left, and that's 28 crucial days where we should be having this conversation because it's really important. I think it's important for my generation, talking to my parents about this. They're completely different perspectives. My parents were born before African Americans had the right to vote. My father wasn't even born in this country. So having their perspective and then combining it with my perspective, where the first person that I'm going to vote for in this country is an African American male. I think that's something that my parents and my family, we've had discussions on our table, and I hope that that's expanded across the country.
I'd like to echo what Pra said about intellectual and political diversity on campus. It might surprise some people, but many Hillary supporters felt persecuted or attacked for supporting Senator Clinton. They were heckled, signs were torn down, and I felt it was largely inappropriate. Now, the one thing that I want to speak about is about gender in the political sphere. And I think that Senator Clinton was held to a double standard in that things that male politicians do, such as being political, alienating people, being partisan at times, were seen in Senator Clinton as examples of her being conniving or her being a quote-unquote bitch. And I felt that was largely it was largely ignored by the media until she was out of the race. And so I think now that she's out of the race, I think we should have a discourse about how gender is construed. Do women have to be like men? Is there a difference between them in terms of how you behave as a politician, as a voter, as an American citizen? I don't think that there is. And so I think that the legacy of Senator Clinton's campaign should be, other than bringing up issues such as healthcare, her legacy should be a larger discussion of whether she was given the kind of fair shake that other first-time candidates were given in the media and in the commentary sphere, let's say.
The last question that I want to ask that I just thought of this honestly, so I apologize. But I was wondering how you feel about the campaigns that are targeted towards your generation, like Choose or Lose or Declare Yourself or Vote or Die, and the ways that both the voter initiative movement, right, in terms of getting people to register and get out there to vote, but also in terms of the ways that campaigns target young voters to try to move them to vote one way or the other. How do you feel about those campaigns? Christina Aguilera with her lips sewn shut and that kind of stuff.
Well, the one thing that I want to say that's great about this election, and I will give a lot of credit to Senator Obama for this is the first election that anyone could ever really think of that young voters actually are courted and we actually seriously matter to campaigns. I think this is fantastic. And I think both campaigns, both Obama and McCain, have worked pretty hard to court young voters because we will be turning out in much larger numbers than in previous years. I think all the Vote or Die and Rock the Vote stuff from 2004, 2000, it was largely ineffective, and the 18 to 24 age bracket was still the lowest voting bracket as a percentage. And so I really hope that will not be the case in this election, and I don't think it will, and I think it'll have a positive impact both on the policy agendas of the campaigns and also of young people themselves. I think more political engagement is overall good for the political process.
I'm going to echo that. you know, growing up in like middle school and high school, everyone was always like, oh, your generation, you don't vote, so you can just be completely ignored. And I always tried to fight that because I was always politically active. I'm like, no, but like I don't agree with that. I want to vote. I've been like the crazy one who like from 6 years old was like, I want to vote, Mom, can you take me to the polls with you? But I mean, like this past weekend, we went to Nevada, and there are 250 Bay Area students who went to Nevada and spent the day registering over 1,200 voters in one day. And I think it's events like that that show the influence and the impact that that my generation is having on this election. And there's actually an article in the latest Newsweek about how the 18 to 25-year-old generation, we're working so hard on these campaigns on both sides, and on Senator Obama's part, we haven't actually asked for anything in return. So we're turning out and we're doing all this work for the campaign. We're going to all these various states. We're registering voters, and we haven't asked for anything. And the article was basically saying that our generation needs to ask for something, which was something that I hadn't actually thought about before, but just actually made me to start thinking about what I want from the candidate, what I expect in return for all of the work that I'm putting into this.
I guess, to speak directly to the voting campaigns, I thought that the one with P. Diddy did one, right? And I thought that was pretty ridiculous. But like, I mean, and I don't think that the campaign Vote or Die is necessarily a friendly campaign to most young voters. But I think that the idea was good. And I think, like both of you guys have said more eloquently than I could, it's created a firestorm around this election. And it's really mobilized people, and it's galvanized our generation to just go out and vote. And I think that's awesome. And I think it's really important and encouraging. Because ultimately, I think the essence of politics is not what candidate you support. It's not policy differences, because those are generational, those change. But what politics is always about is dialogue. It's about talking. And the more voices we can get into that conversation, the better for all of us, regardless of whether they're Republican voices, Democratic voices, Libertarian voices, Green, whatever, any party, whatever party you're a part of, if you hate partisan politics. The more people we can get talking, the more people we can get speaking through their vote, the better for all of us. And I think that's why this election is so encouraging to me, is because even though, you know, a lot of these young voters aren't going to come out and vote for my boy, I think I think it's great that they're getting involved, that they're getting registered, and that they're getting excited about something, about someone, and about some cause. That there's nothing that could be more encouraging to me, and I'm thrilled that it's happening.
Well, I love the youth vote too, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time reiterating, except to say that I think thus far in the election, we have shown that we are a worthy investment of the time and money of all the different campaigns trying to get us to vote. And I hope that on November 4th, we prove to be instrumental in deciding this election, and that we make this kind of new thing permanent on the stage. That being said, I do have some comments about voter registration and the campaigns that are run, because I'm part of a big team on campus right now that's trying to register everybody in this room and every single person you know to vote. And it's really, really hard because every state has different rules, and it's incredibly difficult to navigate the process. And slogans don't do anything. So I'm totally disappointed with the resources that are out there to help young kids vote. I think that young kids are going to register to vote the same way anybody else is going to register to vote, and it's when someone comes and knocks on their door and hands them a form and walks them through it, because it's really complicated and it's hard to request your absentee ballots, though I hope you guys are doing it. And on that note, I'm going to do a plug, which is that at the end of this class, we will be sticking around to help train you to register voters in your dorm, on your sports team, in your eating club. I don't care where it is. You want to go knock on some cute fraternity boy's door, do it. I don't care. Register them to vote. Sorority girl. So it's a huge coalition. We've got plans, we've got free t-shirts, we've got helpful instructions for how to simplify the process. And a lot of you who are taking this class for a number of units, I'm told, have a requisite number of hours to put in for this kind of work. So think of this as a really convenient and fun way to get to know your peers and do that. So I hope you'll think about staying after.
Well, let's give a big round of applause to our panel. Thank you all.
Okay, it's up to Professor Elam and I to wrap things up tonight. And first of all, I want to thank our panelists for their incisive and insightful comments. This was just excellent. I also want to thank Professor Camarillo for his reflections on the history behind these elections. And I especially want to thank Dina Montague for that video we saw, which you have no idea how much work it took. In the sessions going forward, we're going to have a question and answer period following the panel presentations. And the way we're going to handle that is at the beginning of the hour, we're going to distribute 3x5 note cards that you will be able to write your questions on and hand them in, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the time that we have allowed for it. For Stanford students, since you're required to submit a question for the panelists, it's going to be imperative that not only you write a question, but include your name so that we know who you are and we can give you credit at the end of the quarter. And so I'll turn the table over to Michelle, and she has a few words for you as well.
Great, thank you. The student panel was so fascinating to listen to them, and I think one of the things that came up over and over again was, those potent images that they were talking about, and also that you saw in the video, those politically charged images. They really tend to bypass reasoned response, and I don't know about you, but even having seen that video before, they create hot flashes of like emotional response and anger here, and that's precisely why we want to analyze them. And so I want next week is the first. Academic panel that we have October 13th, and many of you have these sheets, I hope. It's the panel that's clustered around media in particular, although it'll bring up all these other issues. And I wanted to make a plug for that, in part because it just came up so much today as well. And I wanted to invite Dorothy Steele, the executive director of the CCSRE, to tell you a little bit about those particular panelists, just to give a plug for it, because it'll be a really exciting group of people too. Thank you.
So the next three meetings, as we're saying, are thematic, and we're trying to get a good base of understanding about how these things work. And we're starting with the panel next week on the media, so that we can sort of see how it is that we're learning about all these things and what influences our understanding of things. Our moderator for next week is Doug Foster. He used to be the director of communications at Stanford University, and before that he was the editor of Mother Jones. He's now a professor of journalism at Northwestern and the friend of the people on the panel. We have a very exciting panel that he will help moderate. David Perlmutter is a professor at the University of Kansas, and he has just written the book Blog Wars, and has done some analyses about how blogging has changed people's understanding of things and who uses blogs and what people make of that. He was just on the Jon Stewart show, and he's going to bring that clip, so that should be very interesting. Steve Montiel is the director of the Annenberg Institute for Journalism and Social Justice. He's been devoted to these issues for his entire life. He's worked with us on with our center on other issues like on 209 and Proposition 54, and is going to come back and help us again. He's a very experienced journalist. Sally Lerman is an award-winning writer and journalist, the author of 2 books on issues of social issues, and is now a professor at Santa Clara University. And finally, Dory Maynard, who's the CEO of the Maynard Institute for Journalism, which is located in Oakland and was founded by her parents, who were the first ever Black owners of a major newspaper, that was the Oakland Tribune. And the institute that she runs trains young journalists and does a lot of comparative work. So I hope that you see that we have a broad array of knowledge coming to us, and that it should set the foundation for the courses that follow. Thank you.
And I also wanted to bring your attention to our web address where you can get all sorts of additional information about the meetings or the panels that we're going to be having going into the future. At this point, I'd like to thank our members of the public who have come out from around the community, around the area, to come and participate in this, and I really, really hope to see you in future sessions. We'll be looking forward to having you with us. We really appreciate your participation and value having you here. For you Stanford students, you're not quite done for the night. We'd like you to stay around for 10 or 15 minutes to meet with Tania and the teaching assistants to talk about exactly what you're going to be required to do for this course, whether you've signed up for 1 unit, 2 units, or 3 units. So thank you all very much for your participation.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.